Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm your worship associate, Jen Mason. The message today is about joy of mindfulness. So what is mindfulness? It is not some esoteric, strange, advanced practice that only a few people in the world can do. In mindfulness, we stop, center, breathe, become aware of the miracle of life already present within and around us. Our speaker today, Dr. Alok Kalia, will help us understand the joy of mindfulness. He and his wife, Dr. Aja Kalia, have traveled to our church today from the Houston, it's the southeast of Houston area. Alok Kalia is a retired professor from the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston and a longtime member of the Bay Area Unitarian Universalist Church. For the past 13 years, he's been a professional speaker on healthy eating and stress management for business executives. I think maybe we all want that. Yes. His core beliefs come from Hinduism, but he puts them into practice as a Unitarian Universalist. And as I've told you several months ago, he spells his religion H-I-N-D-U-U. Dr. Kalia explains that life sometimes feels like an endless journey around hurrying and worrying. The mind is preoccupied with reimagining the past and preparing for the future. There is no time for noticing what is happening here and now. This affects the quality of our relationships and our awareness of the needs of others. In this talk, he will suggest ways to slow down and experience each moment, to mindfully participate in life and live it in the best way we can. Let us listen carefully to his wisdom that he will share with us today.
Good morning. How many of you have had an out-of-body experience? How many of you have had an out-of-body experience this morning? The answer is everyone. Everyone, yeah. To see whether you had I'm calling it OOB, whether you had an OOB, we must first define who you is. You are clearly not identified by your body. You don't look anything like you did when you were 3 years old, right? But you're considered the same person. Okay? Or take a pair of identical twins. They are physically the same, their DNA is the same, but they are two different people. What is it that gives them their individual identity, defines them as different from each other? It is, of course, their minds and the contents of their minds, their emotions, their memories. We are each identified not by our body but by our mind. Two humans might look identical, but two minds are never identical. So, I am my mind. And for me to have an OOB, my mind must leave my body. Can it? Sure. If I do something silly, what's my excuse? I'm sorry, I must have lost my mind. Okay? Or my mind was elsewhere. So if my mind is me, then clearly I was having an out-of-body experience. We even have words for this, mindful and mindless. Okay? Getting into your car at the start of a vacation. Have you ever said to yourself, did I turn off the oven? Did I lock the front door? Of course you did. But you have no recollection of doing so, because when you are performing that action, your physical self, your body was present, but your mind was elsewhere. Right? We spend much of our life in this state, doing one thing while thinking of another. During some religious festivals in India, a beautifully decorated elephant is taken through the streets. The streets are narrow, and the elephant is an eternally curious animal. If left to its own devices, it will use its trunk to pick up stuff from the roadside vendors and yeah. So the elephant driver gives the elephant a stick to hold in its trunk. Okay? Now the elephant has the responsibility. It is focused on the stick. The trunk stops exploring. Our mind is like that curious elephant. It is always thinking, planning, reminiscing. It often leaves the body to go exploring on its own, leaving us mindless. Today, we will be talking about meditation. One of the goals of meditation is to deal with the wandering mind. Just as with the elephant walking down the street, we need a stick, an object for the mind to hold on to. A common object of focus during meditation is the breath. So let's play with the breath. Please close your eyes and take 3 deep breaths. Okay, all right. So what you did was you deliberately inhaled and exhaled. You decided when to breathe. That is called leading the breath. Now, please close your eyes again. Don't do anything, just relax and let the body breathe. It will breathe. So this time, you let the body decide when to breathe. You just followed the breath. In meditation, typically one follows the breath. Now let's go one step further. I will ask you to please close your eyes again and follow the breath. As you inhale, try to feel the air coming in through your nose. And as you exhale, try to feel the air as it goes out of your nose. It's quite subtle, but go ahead and try it for a few breaths. Now, let's go to step 2. When I talk about meditation, many people say, "Oh, I can't meditate. My mind wanders too much." Of course it does. It is the nature of the mind to wander. But during meditation, each time you realize that your mind has wandered, you just bring it back to the breath. So let's try this final exercise. I will ask you to go through 10 breaths. Try to keep your focus on the air going in and out of your nose. If you catch your mind wandering, just return your focus to the breath. So please close your eyes and go for it. 10 breaths. Thank you. The point I was trying to make is that meditation is not about stilling the mind, but about learning to bring the mind back each time it tries to wander. Meditation is about learning to reduce the number of out-of-body experiences. Life is just a series of moments. The moment that has just passed, the one that is now, and the one that hopefully will come next. These moments stitched together make up the story, the book of our life. This book contains all that we have experienced, the highs and the lows, the loves and the losses, the successes and the failures. Now, what if I wrote down only every other word in the book? It would make for a chopped up story. You will still sort of know what my life was about, but much of the detail, the richness, will be lost. And that is what happens. We do not truly experience so many of the moments in our life because the mind is away doing one thing while we are doing another. The more we hurry, the more distracted we are, the more moments we miss. To be mindful means to slow down and experience life, as much of it as we can, to be aware of as many moments as we can. And there are two aspects to mindfulness. The first is to fully perceive, be aware of what is going on around us, of the information that's coming in through our senses. What we are seeing, hearing, touching. Let's call that the external landscape. The second, and perhaps even more important aspect of mindfulness is to be aware of the internal landscape, what is going on inside of us, the thoughts and the emotions that come and go in a never-ending stream. To be aware of what the mind is up to. The mind, of course, frequently leaves the present moment and goes elsewhere. Often, we ask it to do so. Sometimes, however, it is pulled away by an external force, and we'll get into that. And finally, if we are just sitting around thinking of nothing, the mind can decide to wander off and do its own thing. Let's follow the mind around for a bit. For the next few moments, please look around this sanctuary. What do you see? See the flowers? Me standing at the pulpit? Just notice what is around you without thinking about what you are seeing. You are now aware of your surroundings. You are now mindful of your external landscape. You are not yet doing anything with the information. Your mind is like a car that's in neutral with the engine running. It's not going anywhere yet. But of course, we don't always keep the mind in neutral. We want the mind to act, to do something. What can the mind do? Well, we can ask it to focus on something. As I'm speaking, your mind is focused on me and the words I'm saying. Let's take an extreme example. If I'm feeding a piece of wood into the spinning blade of a table saw, my mind is going to be focused at the point the wood meets the blade. Correct? And the mind will ignore everything else around. The same happens when I'm engrossed in a book or concentrating on a problem. I'm totally oblivious of my surroundings. So I can ask the mind to focus. What else? I can send my mind into the future. I can imagine the future, plan for it. Whether it's just a dinner party next week or a 2-week vacation next year. I can also send my mind into the past. I can reimagine the past, recreate the past, and learn from it. Anything else? Well, when you are sitting around thinking about nothing, the mind is left to its own devices. And something fascinating happens. You've heard the phrase, when the cat is away, the mice play. So when you, the boss, is away, a set of interconnected brain areas become activated and they start talking to each other. This collective network of brain cells is known as the default mode network. What does this network do? Well, researchers have put people into a special kind of MRI machine and told them not to think about anything. Let whatever thoughts come. And the machine can tell when the default mode network becomes active. And when these people come out of the machine, they are asked, what did you think? What thoughts arose? And it's very interesting. It turns out that most of these thoughts circle around I or me. I am hungry. Okay? I was denied that promotion. How can he talk to me like that? It's all about I and me. Me, me, me. And so what people think now is that the default mode network builds up the ego. Okay? And the ego is what? The ego is the understanding that I am separate from you. We all have an ego. But too strong an ego, too much looking out only for number one, can blunt the ability to sympathize and empathize. I can speculate that giving too much power to the default mode network may even sow the seeds of resentment and revenge. You've heard the phrase that an empty mind is the devil's workshop, right? Perhaps the empty mind is the default mode network's workshop. Yeah. Now, it is worth noting that all these places the mind can be, focused on a task, traveling to the future, traveling to the past, or sitting around, I can instantly and effortlessly call the mind back to the present. I can snap back into the present and stay there. The mind is under my control. However, there are times when the mind is pulled away by an external force, kicking and screaming against our wishes. That force is known as stress. Okay? The stress response, also called the fight or flight response, dates back from a distant past and appears to be designed to help us survive physical danger. So when my ancestor 20,000 years ago suddenly came face to face with a grizzly bear, right, the fight or flight response was activated. The heart rate went up, the blood pressure went up, the muscles tensed, and the mind was immediately and completely focused on the grizzly, on the threat, and stayed focused to the exclusion of everything else until the threat was resolved, one way or the other. These days, we rarely face physical threats. The problem is, though, that the mind does not differentiate between physical threats and emotional threats. To the mind, the fear of being fired from one's job, a job that is desperately needed, is the same as facing a grizzly. Just as with the bear, the mind keeps trying to focus on the threat over and over and over again. Have you ever spent a sleepless night tossing and turning, your mind going back to an anxiety, a worry that was consuming you? We've all done that, right? So, stress can kidnap the mind. The stressed out mind is not really under our control. It keeps returning to the threat. Now, most emotional stress can be traced to three causes. Yes, the mind can go into the future to imagine and plan. But the same imagining of the future can lead to anxiety and apprehension. Right? Whether it's waiting for the results of a medical test, or worrying about a teenager who is not home at 2 o'clock in the morning and is not answering his cell phone. Okay? We imagine the worst. Nothing has happened yet. But once the imagination begins to run wild, there's little you can do about it. Similarly, we stress about past events. I wish I hadn't said that. I wish I hadn't done that. Okay? The third cause of stress is anger from our desires not being granted, from not getting our way. Every other kind of stress, relationship stress, time stress, money stress, the world is going to hell in a handbasket stress, can spring from these three. Okay. and the mind gets kidnapped, the mind gets dragged into it. So, enough about the problems. What can we do to try and train the mind to stay aware and centered, to strengthen its defenses against being kidnapped? Now, interestingly, the mind can only handle one landscape at a time, the external or the internal, if you think about that. The more we are engaged with the external landscape, more we are aware, the more attention we learn to pay to what is going on around us, the less time the mind has to brood on what's going on inside us. So how do we become more mindful of our external landscape? Training the mind to pay attention is like training a puppy. You have to do certain exercises over and over again. Few of us will become masters of mindfulness, but most of us, with a bit of patience and practice, can move at least a few steps in the right direction. There are two simple exercises that I have found useful, and both involve activities of daily life. The first is to practice listening mindfully, paying attention, full attention, while having a conversation. When I was a medical student in India, I was fortunate to participate in a course on mindful listening. And when I look back at my career as a physician, that might have been the most important thing I learned in medical school. Usually, during a conversation, once we think that the other person has said about 2/3 of what they're going to say, we begin to work on a response. We are no longer paying full attention to what the other person is saying. Often we interrupt the other person with our response. We do not let them finish. We do not hear them out. Instead, when having a conversation about something important, practice listening with full attention until the other person has finished. Then repeat back to the person what you heard. Once the other person agrees that you heard them completely and correctly, then and only then start working on your response. This improves the quality of communication and the quality of the conversation. Now, this is not necessary in casual conversation, but if something is important, doing this is good, especially if there is a difference of opinion. It slows down the conversation and can prevent it from escalating into an argument. Because each person knows that she or he is being heard, is being respected. Also, if you routinely try to hear out those who are close to you, they will love you more because you're listening to them. One of the biggest gifts you can give a human being is to listen. I do have to warn you that when you are trying to do this, the other person may not follow the rules. Okay? And may continue to interrupt. Stay calm and just do your thing. The goal is to train your mind to pay attention. Okay? The second exercise is to eat mindfully. So often we eat mindlessly. We eat while doing or thinking of something else. So try this. It's a good experiment. Make yourself a nice salad. 3-4 kinds of veggies, tomato, broccoli, kale, whatever. Now sit down by yourself with the salad. No talking, no TV, no reading. Put a piece of tomato in your mouth and chew it slowly, savoring its taste and also its texture. Then do the same with a piece of broccoli and compare the taste and texture to the tomato. Try a piece of feta cheese. Try mixing two things. And each time, before each bite, look at your fork. That is your stick. If the mind is beginning to wander, that fork will help you bring it back to the issue at hand. And the mind will wander. The mind will wander. And from my own experience, the food tastes so much better because you're respecting the food. You're giving it some attention. Now, let's look at the internal landscape. These two exercises were for the external landscape. Just as the eyes see one thing after another, the mind generates one thought after another. And we know that some of these thoughts can kidnap the mind. So how do we learn to bring the mind back and keep it centered? And that brings us to the practice of meditation. There are two parts to meditation, and you've done both. The first is to learn to use an object, such as the breath, for the mind to focus on. And the second and more important is to notice when a thought has captured the mind and pulled it away, and to gently disentangle the mind from the thought and bring it back to the breath, to the present. Oftentimes, these thoughts can take over the mind, and they direct the movie that is your life. Okay? Meditation turns us into a movie critic sitting in the audience. Watching the movie of your life, your thoughts go by. You are detached. And we can then decide which thoughts to listen to and which to ignore. And by helping us to do this, meditation calms the mind. If you're interested in experimenting with meditation, there's an app I can recommend. It's called 10% Happier. And the free version of the app has a basic course, I think a 7-part course on learning how to meditate. And it's a good app. And once you start meditating regularly, you will see changes in yourself. Okay? I've been there. So the practice of mindfulness just means being more aware of what is going on around us and inside us. Being mindful helps to improve the quality of our conversations and therefore our relationships. Mindfulness helps us to become more aware of the needs of others because you are aware. And this increases our tendency and capacity for compassion. Perhaps most important, mindfulness, along with a bit of meditation, can help to mitigate this tension, this stress that seems to be a constant undercurrent in this fast-changing world. Living mindfully can help each of us write a more vivid, a more complete book about our life.
I think I need him to repeat all of that. We have a lot to learn. That was very special. Thank you.